Stay hidden until midnight, Mrs. Jenner whispered, handing me the binoculars. You'll finally see what they're doing. I adjusted the cushion beneath my legs. Her screened-in porch faced my side yard perfectly. We had the lights-off windows cracked just enough for air and a thermos of decaf sitting between us like it was an ordinary evening. But nothing about tonight felt ordinary. Earlier that morning, I'd packed a small bag with travel-size shampoo and 2 cardigans, then told Nate I'd be staying with my sister in Roanoke for 4 days. Just to recharge, I'd smiled. He barely looked up from his phone. Marla gave a polite nod, already half distracted by a call. They didn't even ask when I'd be back. I'd done this before shorter versions. 1 night in Charleston, 2 days visiting a church friend in Durham. Every time I returned, something felt wrong. The milk in the fridge had been opened. Towels folded the wrong way. My crochet box moved half an inch on the shelf. Small things. Easy to dismiss, but not tonight. At 11:52, a car pulled up. I sat up straighter. Nate got out first, holding what looked like a wine bottle. Marla followed, keys in hand, laughing too loudly for the hour. Behind them were 2 strangers, one with a rolling suitcase, the other wearing a university hoodie. Marla opened my side door like it was hers. I gripped the binoculars tighter. They all walked in confident, relaxed chatting, like they were arriving at a weekend rental. One of the strangers glanced around and said something I couldn't hear. Nate smiled. Then he said something that turned my stomach. She won't be back until Monday. Mrs. Jenner didn't speak. She didn't need to. From where I sat in the dark, I saw my hallway light turn on. My own home glowing without me in it. And for the first time, I understood what I'd been feeling for months. They didn't just think I was gone. They were counting on it. It started small, subtle, the kind of details you question yourself for noticing. The throw blanket I always kept folded over the back of the couch, it had gone missing for 2 days, then reappeared in the laundry basket, damp and smelling of cologne. The guest towels in the upstairs bathroom were folded corner in instead of corner out, and my cinnamon soap had a thumbprint in it. The quilt in the spare bedroom had creases across it, like someone had sat there too long. Each time I asked Nate casually, "Did you use the guest bath?" He'd shrug. "Nope. Maybe you forgot." Or Marla. "Maybe the housekeeper bumped something when she cleaned, but I hadn't hired a housekeeper since last spring." Once I came home from a weekend retreat, and the milk in the fridge had less in it. I don't drink milk. I checked the ring around the top. It had been opened. The air always felt different when I returned. It was in the way the front door stuck slightly, like it had been opened too often in my absence. In the way the lamp by the window was tilted just a little, how the kitchen chairs didn't line up perfectly anymore. The dog figurine on the mantel had once been turned backward. Nate said, I must have bumped it. I hadn't. I started leaving little markers. A strand of sewing thread tucked under the rug corner, a pencil placed on top of the cabinet molding. They moved. That's when I stopped feeling uncertain and started taking notes. I began keeping a log in a plain notepad under the sink. Date I left. What I found. What they said. And when the same strange woman showed up in our driveway for the 3rd time, blonde floral suitcase, same exact scarf, I didn't ask them about it. I watched her ring the bell. I saw Marla let her in through the side. That was 2 weeks before the night I sat with Mrs. Jenner, and by then I had already decided what I needed to do next. Another one showed up at 11:58. A man with a backpack slung over one shoulder, tapping his phone like he was checking a reservation. He didn't knock, he just waited until Marla opened the door with a wide, artificial smile. He nodded and stepped inside like it was a hotel lobby. 3 minutes later, a young woman in heels arrived, dragging a rose gold suitcase. She paused to take a selfie on my front porch. I recognized the planter beside her. I'd potted those begonias myself in March. Mrs. Jenner handed me the binoculars again. The woman stepped inside, laughed, and immediately kicked off her shoes in my hallway. Then I saw her lean into the kitchen and pull something out of the fridge. I couldn't see what just the light flicking on and her standing there like it belonged to her. By 12:15, 4 strangers had entered. One of them sat in my recliner, my husband's recliner legs crossed, sipping from a glass I could almost swear was one of my etched water goblets. Another walked upstairs carrying a duffel bag. "Recognize any of them?" Mrs. Jenner asked softly. I shook my head. "Not one." She exhaled through her nose. "They've been doing this for weeks, Corliss. Every time you go somewhere. Different people. Always at night." The heat rose in my chest, but I stayed still. Rage didn't help. I needed facts. I needed a pattern, and now I had one. The porch light was off now, probably to avoid drawing attention, but inside the kitchen was fully lit. I could see Marla reaching into my cabinet. My cabinet. When she stepped back, she handed a guest one of my ceramic bowls, the blue ones from the set Nate had given me 3 Christmases ago. The man smiled, said something, and leaned casually against my counter, as if it were his. Mrs. Jenner whispered, "They think you're gone for real this time." I nodded, slowly, jaw tight. They were too comfortable now, which meant I had to move quickly before they got even bolder. They left the house at 9:12 a.m. Sharp. I waited 10 more minutes just to be sure. Mrs. Jenner stood near the hedge phone in hand, ready to call if anyone returned. I used the keypad inside the garage. I'd never changed the code. Neither had they. The house smelled like someone else's perfume. The hallway rug was bunched at one corner. A lipstick cap rested on the hallway table. There were 3 coffee mugs in the sink, none of them mine. I went straight upstairs. The guest bedroom looked like a cheap hotel. The bedding had been swapped out. My floral comforter was balled up in a corner, tossed like a rag. There was a tote bag in the closet, zipped up but bulging. I didn't open it. In the master bedroom, the top of my dresser was cleared. My framed photos. Peter in uniform. Nate's graduation, my parents at the cabin were gone. I opened the drawer. They were stacked face down. No broken glass, no cracks. Just hidden, like I didn't belong. Marla's desk was in the corner, shoved next to the vanity. I'd never seen her bring a desk in. There was a small lock, but nothing fancy. I slid a hairpin from my bun and jiggled it loose in less than 10 seconds. Working at the post office taught me all sorts of useful skills. Inside envelopes, sticky notes, a calculator. Then I found the folder. Inside the folder, a printed rental calendar labeled Biltmore Chic Stay. Multiple weekends marked as booked. A stack of folded 20s and 50s. And then the lease. My hands went still. The lease was fake but professional looking. The document listed Nate as the legal owner of the property. Not me. I turned the last page and found one more printout. Appointment confirmation. Cognitive assessment patient Boone Corliss. Time Tuesday, sec of 15 p.m. I read it twice before my knees gave out. I sat on the edge of the bed, the folder in my lap. They weren't just borrowing the house. They were preparing to take it from me entirely. Ellen didn't raise her voice when I told her what I found. She didn't gasp or lean back dramatically. She just listened, pen poised above her legal pad, her expression tightening with every detail. I'd known her long enough to recognize that kind of silence, one that meant trouble, but also a plan forming. When I finished, she folded her hands. "The deed is still yours, Corliss. They can't change that without your signature." I exhaled, but it didn't feel like relief. "Not really." "And the power of attorney?" I asked. Ellen shook her head. "Never filed, never notarized. Whatever document they have, it's worthless unless you sign it voluntarily." She tapped her pen twice. "But the fact they prepared it, that's another matter." She spent the next 40 minutes drafting documents. I watched her work steady and meticulous, her sleeves rolled up as if bracing herself against the anger. Neither of us spoke aloud. First came the revocation and official notice ending Nate and Marla's right to stay in my home. Then the cease and desist forbidding any rental activity using my property. Finally, a temporary freeze on my checking accounts, just in case they had memorized more information than they should have. When Ellen slid the stack toward me to sign, my hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the sickening realization that I needed to protect myself from my own son. Ellen placed a warm hand on mine. "You're doing what you have to do." I nodded, signed each page, and tucked the documents into a folder she handed me. On the front, she'd written my name in bold, steady letters. It looked like a lifeline. Now she said, "Sitting back, we report the unauthorized rental. Quietly. Legally. With documentation." I took out my phone and dialed the city's housing inspection office. My voice didn't shake. I stated my name, my address, and the nature of the complaint. The clerk told me someone could come by as early as Friday evening. "That works," I said, glancing at the calendar in Ellen's office. Nate and Marla always hosted guests on Fridays. Ellen looked at me over her glasses. Then we let the system do the rest. I thanked her and stepped out into the hallway, folder in hand, feeling something settle inside me, steady, cold, and ready for whatever came next. The city inspector showed up at 2:47 p.m. sharp. I watched from Mrs. Jenner's living room, the curtains drawn just enough to see without being seen. Clipboard in hand, he circled my front porch, snapped photos of the lockbox. The spare shoes left outside the welcome sign. Marla must have hung that read, "Relax. You're home." Home. That word scraped across my chest like broken glass. The guests were inside, a young couple, and what looked like a traveling nurse, judging by her scrubs. They opened the door when the inspector knocked. He introduced himself, showed his badge, and stepped in. Marla's car rolled in 10 minutes later. Nate was in the passenger seat, gesturing as he spoke. She parked two fast tires, kissing the curb. I could see the confusion hit her face as she spotted the yellow notice taped to the porch post. She got out slowly. Nate didn't. The inspector walked out just as she stepped onto the porch. He didn't yell, didn't accuse, just handed her a clipboard and explained the citation. I couldn't hear the words, but her shoulders tensed the way a child does when caught lying with the cookie jar still open. No business permit, no license, no record of tax reporting. Violation of city code. Marla said something sharp. The inspector didn't flinch. He pointed to the notice, then to the lockbox by the door. She snatched it down, nearly dropped it. The guests came out a few minutes later, quiet, confused. One of them mouthed something like, "Sorry" to Marla as they wheeled their luggage away. Nate finally got out of the car, but kept his distance, arms crossed tight. I didn't move. I didn't speak, just watched from across the street as they stood on my porch, like it had never occurred to them this moment might come. When the inspector drove off, Marla peeled the notice off the post and crumpled it in her fist. Nate kicked the front step hard enough to startle her, and I sat there with the real keys in my pocket, knowing the next knock on their door wouldn't be from the city. It would be from me. They came over just after sunset, silhouettes against Mrs. Jenner's porch light. I heard their voices before they knocked, urgent, hushed, rehearsed. Mrs. Jenner gave me a look that asked if I wanted her to send them away. I shook my head. I wasn't hiding anymore. Nate knocked once, then again, harder. "Mom, can we talk, please?" I opened the door enough to face them, but not enough for them to step inside. Marla stood slightly behind Nate, arms crossed, jaw set tight. "You could have said something," Nate muttered. "We didn't deserve to be blindsided like that." "You rented out my house," I replied. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Every time I left one night, 2 nights, you opened the door to strangers." Nate flinched. It wasn't like that. Marla stepped forward. We needed the money, Corliss. You were barely using the space. The upstairs was just sitting there. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. You mean the home I built? The rooms your father painted? The place you grew up in? Marla's eyes flickered, but she didn't back down. We weren't hurting anything. The house looked the same when you came back. The house looked rearranged, I corrected. My things hidden, my belongings touched, my privacy gone. Nate rubbed the back of his neck. We never meant for it to go so far. Then how far was it supposed to go? I asked. Until you could replace me entirely. He opened his mouth, but didn't answer. Marla spoke instead, sharp and defensive. We were trying to help with bills. You don't realize how much you spend living alone. We were doing the responsible thing. By lying to me, I stepped fully onto the porch, forcing them back a little. By pretending everything was normal. By bringing strangers into the bedroom where your father died. That landed. Nate's shoulders sagged. We made mistakes, he said. But we're still family. Family doesn't take advantage when you turn your back. I held their eyes one by one. And you've been taking advantage for a long time. For a moment, none of us spoke. The night around us felt strangely quiet, like the house itself was listening. Finally, Marla exhaled sharply. So what now? I closed the porch door halfway, keeping my voice even. Now I said, you go home and pack. By Monday morning, the paper trail was undeniable. Ellen had pulled Marla's recent transactions, and the numbers spoke louder than any confession. Over $9,000 from short-term rental platforms, all funneled quietly into an account Marla kept separate from the one she shared with Nate. The deposits lined up perfectly with every trip I'd taken in the last 3 months. I didn't ask Nate about it. I didn't need to. The facts had already finished the conversation. Ellen filed the civil claims that afternoon: property misuse, unauthorized commercial activity, and financial exploitation. Not criminal charges, not yet, though she made it clear I had enough evidence to press them if I ever chose to. I wasn't ready for that. Not then. Civil court was enough to make them face what they had done without dragging the Boone name through more public mud. A judge granted the emergency order. 72 hours to vacate. No exceptions. No appeals until the hearing date. When the officer delivered the notice, I wasn't there. I didn't want to watch them read it. I only returned once Ellen confirmed they'd left the house to get some air. I walked up the front steps slowly, the real keys in hand, and opened the door to what felt like a space recovering from a long fever. The air was stale, with someone else's laundry detergent. Shoes I didn't recognize sat by the stairs. My pantry had items I never bought. A jar of honey with a label in a language I didn't speak. I moved quietly, almost afraid to see what else had changed. Upstairs, the guest room was stripped bare, as if someone had tried to erase the weekend in a hurry. But when I stepped closer to the window, something caught my eye. A faint glint behind the curtain rod. I stood on the chair and lifted the fabric. A small camera, no larger than my thumb. My stomach dropped. I reached behind the opposite rod. Another one. I took both down with gloved hands, placed them gently into a paper bag, and sealed the top with tape. Ellen would need to see them. As I carried the bag downstairs, I realized the house felt different again. But for the first time in weeks, it felt like it belonged to me. The locksmith arrived before noon, a quiet man who didn't ask questions. I stood on the porch while he worked, listening to the clicks and turns of new metal settling into old wood. When he handed me the fresh set of keys, the weight of them felt different, solid, final. I slipped them into my pocket and locked the door behind him myself. Inside the house was still in disarray from the inspection and the hurried exit that followed. I started in the living room, gathering stray items that didn't belong to me. A pair of sunglasses, a travel mug, a guidebook for a nearby hiking trail. They all went into a donation box. Anything that smelled like someone else's life I let go of. I moved slowly, room by room, dusting shelves, wiping down the kitchen counters, shaking out throw blankets. I washed every dish, whether it looked used or not. The more I worked, the more I felt pieces of myself settle back into place. Upstairs, I stripped the beds and bundled all the linens into trash bags for the dump. I couldn't imagine salvaging anything that had been slept in by strangers. The guest furniture followed box spring side table lamp. A local charity came with a truck and carried it all away without comment. When the rooms were finally bare, I opened every window. Fresh air slid through the house, lifting the heaviness from the corners. Curtains swayed lightly, as if reminding the house to breathe again. In the master bedroom, I placed my old framed photos back on the dresser. My parents. Peter. A young Nate with braces and a summer tan. The familiar faces steadied me more than I expected. Then I reached into the top drawer. The note was still there, tucked between an old postcard and a book of stamps. Nate had written it after his freshman year of college, a simple thank you for helping him buy supplies. "Thank you for everything, Mom." The edges had softened with age. I folded it once more and slid it back into the drawer, not to forget it, but not to dwell on it either. When I went back downstairs, the house felt like mine again, quiet, textured, real, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The porch light stays on now, not to guide anyone in, not for reservations or check-ins or strangers dragging suitcases up the walkway, just for the quiet comfort of knowing it's mine to leave on. I've started tending the yard again, pulled the weeds that overtook the rose bed while I was distracted with legal forms and whispered doubts. The lavender bush came back stronger than I expected. I trimmed the hedges myself last Saturday and reseeded the patch where Nate used to park. Inside the house breathes differently. No footsteps overhead that I can't place. No echo of voices that don't belong to my life. When I walk down the hall now, it feels like each frame, each creak, each shadow recognizes me again. Some evenings, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and just let the stillness hold me. I think about that first night, watching from Mrs. Jenner's porch, heart pounding as my son and his wife handed over my keys like they were candy. I remember how my home had come alive without me, full of strangers' laughter and suitcase wheels and open cabinets. I remember the weight of that moment, not just the betrayal, but the understanding. They weren't just using the house. They had begun to erase me from it. Now there's no lockbox, no guest towels in the linen closet, no calendars on the fridge with other people's check-in times. Just my routines, quiet and deliberate, stitched back into the walls where they belong. Mrs. Jenner still waves from her porch. She brings me tomatoes from her garden, and I bring her fresh muffins when I bake. The simple rhythm of neighbors unchanged and unpretending. The appointment card for the cognitive assessment still sits in my folder of legal papers. I never canceled it. I never went either. Some part of me wanted it there, a record of the line they were willing to cross. But now the only thing crossing my mind is peace. I turn off the kitchen light, walk to the stairs, and take one last glance at the door behind me, knowing it will stay closed unless I choose to open it.